What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today we're going to be looking at the top 15 most unique commanders that we got from 2024. I usually do top 10, top 5 videos, but hey, there's been a lot of very unique commanders, so we're going to slap a top 15 on this video. But before we get into it, let's shout out those patrons. Irrelevant, you rock. Additionally, if any of you guys want a free $15, you can click on that whatnot link in the description down below. You guys get some free money and it helps out the channel. Another thing that really helps out the channel is liking, commenting, and subscribing. But with that being said, let's get right into it with number 15. Etrata Deadly Fugitive. This girl's pretty unique, and honestly, there's a couple different routes you can take her when you're building this deck, but let's look at what she does. She's 3 mana in Dimir, she has Death Touch, and additionally, she has this really cool ability. Whenever an assassin deals combat damage to a player, you get to cloak the top card of their library. Cloak is just basically a morph, but it has ward, so we're gonna take that. Additionally, we can spend 4 mana to Dimir and 2 generic to flip these morph cards face up, and then if they're not creature cards, we just get a straight up cast them, which is kind of crazy. Additionally, I think she's going to be one of, if not the most fun tribal commanders, because whenever we slam a Maskwood Nexus on the battlefield, we're going to turn all of those cloaked creatures into assassins themselves. This effectively makes it to where we can double our board every single turn, right? We attack with our commander, we get a cloaked creature. If that cloaked creature is also an assassin, we're going to get 2 assassins, 4 assassins, 8 assassins, and it gets out of control very quickly. Then you just shove in your payoffs like Mari here. You're getting a ton of value off of that. We're able to slam in some other creatures that care about a certain tribe and get value out of them as well, since Maskwood Nexus does care about every single tribe, since we can turn it into every creature type. Additionally, we want to play some cards that incentivize our opponents not to block, right? Luckily, we have an assassin that does that with Massacre Girl. No one likes Wither, so they're gonna let you through. That's going to allow you to get the value you need out of this commander. At number 14, we have Kellan the Kid. This guy's super interesting. He's a green, white, and a blue, and then he says whenever we cast a spell anywhere other than our hand, we can cast a spell from our hand of lesser CMC for free. If we didn't, we just get to put a land into play. So we're ramping and getting free value off of casting spells. So we want to play a lot of cards that give us access to the top card of our library, to our graveyard. We can play with the foretell mechanic, the plot mechanic. There's a ton of different ways that we can cast spells from anywhere other than our hand. Additionally, this guy's really powerful with the Cypher mechanic, because whenever you cast the copy of the Cypher spell, it also has the same CMC. So if we cast a Cypher spell for 4 mana, even though we're not casting it because we're just casting it for its Cypher, which activates whenever we deal combat damage, we still get to cheat a 3 CMC or less spell into play, which is really busted here. Additionally, we're going to want to play cost reducers because we're kind of incentivized to play spells with higher CMCs. That way we're able to cheat the cards from our hand into play. Additionally, this guy is really powerful and has a broken combo that allows you to draw your entire library with Sensei's Divining Top. Let's say we have something that allows us to play the top of a card of our library. We're reducing the top card of our library with, or reducing the CMC of the top card of our library with stuff like Doc Arlock, and then additionally we're playing Sensei's Divining Top that messes with the top card of our library, allowing us to dig deeper, move around some cards. That way we're able to cast the cards we want. Now combine all 3 of these together and you can draw your entire deck for free while putting all of the lands you want onto the battlefield for free, and just win any of the ways you want, because again, now you've got your entire deck in your hand. At number 13, we have Niko. Now, sadly, you won't find this guy's deck list listed in the description down below. I do have it on my Patreon, though. I think that's what I'm going to start doing with these deck lists that I don't have time to post on my channel. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments down below. But regardless, this guy's incredibly interesting. For a blue, a white, and 2 generic, we get a creature that enters the battlefield and then creates 2 shard tokens. Then for 2 mana, we get to exile one of our creatures until the end step, and all of our shard tokens are going to become a token copy of that creature. Now, this is incredibly powerful if used right. We kind of just want to mix a lot of very good ETB creatures along with a bunch of creatures that win you the game once you get a mass amount of them on the battlefield, like your Heroes of Bladehold, your Illustrious Wanderglyphs, your Sky Hunters, right? These are all creatures that not only generate a board state, but additionally buff up themselves along with all the other creatures they create, right? Get 5 or 10 of these on the battlefield, you're probably just going to win the game. Additionally, we get to utilize incentivize all of those awesome creatures with very good ETB effects, because we want to blink our commander a ton to get more of these shard tokens. And then additionally, we do sometimes just spend the 2 mana, turn our shards into something useless, but we get the ETB again whenever that creature re-enters the battlefield. So we get a very cool utility commander that can dish out a ton of damage in these, Azorius colors. Something you're not expecting from Azorius at all. At number 12, we have Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, and like most of these deck lists, you can find this one in the description down below. Now, right out of the gate, I really did notice that this girl's incredibly broken with the courts. The reason is, this girl says whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you're just going to go ahead and get that many upkeep triggers. That's kind of insane, right? So the goal is pretty simple here. We want to buff up Obeka, and then we're going to want to pair her with the courts. The reason we want to pair her with the courts is because she triggers after combat damage, and the courts really incentivize you to have the Monarch. Now, what we do here is we just take the Monarch back with our Obeka. That's probably unblockable, because that's going to be something that we want to make her, right? We want to make sure this girl can connect. So now she's unblockable. We can take the Monarch from whoever we want, and then we're going to ensure that we always get the best version of these court triggers. Some of these are just game breaking and win you the game outright. Some of them aren't as good but still generate a ton of value. Then you pair her with your Phyrexian Arena effects to draw a ton of cards. You can pair her with the suspend mechanic. She gets rid of all of those suspend counters really fast, getting us instant value out of those cards. There's just a lot of wacky stuff you can do with this girl, and honestly, she's pretty powerful when you get her set up and she pops off. At number 11, we have one of my favorite commanders of the entire year with the Mothman. Now, this guy, whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, he's going to give everybody a rad counter. Rad counters force our opponents to mill, and then whenever a non-land card is milled this way, we can put up to X 1/1 counters on up to X creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled. Now, what I like about this guy is he incentivizes us to get incremental value off of our counters being placed on creatures, which is not the norm, right? We're just trying to put 10 counters on one creature, make it massive, and then hit someone in the face or get value off of it, like something like a Savala. Commander players are not used to getting value off of incremental value things, and the Mothman really incentivizes that. So whenever we play something like a Fathom Mage, we're actually rewarded because we're just putting one counter on it at a time, and we're getting that card advantage. Same with stuff like Herdbaleth. Not to mention, he has incredibly broken interactions with the mill spells that allow us to mill our opponents incrementally as well, right? Because again, we kind of only need to mill one card per time that's a non-land to get that 1/1 counter effect. So whenever we have something that mills our opponents whenever we draw a card, and then Fathom Mage on the battlefield, you might just be able to mill out one of your opponents outright while making a massive Fathom Mage and drawing your deck. Because what's going to happen is we put a 1/1 counter on Fathom Mage, we draw a card, we mill our opponents, maybe as long as they mill a non-land card, we get to put another 1/1 counter on Fathom Mage. Kind of broken here. Same kind of thing happens with Altar of the Brood and Herdbaleth. Whenever we put a 1/1 counter on Herdbaleth, we get a 4/4 Baleth that's going to cause our opponents to mill a card because of Altar of the Brood, and as long as they milled a non-land as long as they milled a non-land card, you guessed it, we trigger Altar of the Brood again. So there is a lot of kind of near infinite combos in this deck, but not infinite outright, and I just think this guy's a super interesting commander overall. That's why he's going to get a spot on this list. Breaking into the top 10, we have Zinnia, Valley's Voice. Now, this is a 3-mana commander, a blue, white, and a red, and does something very simple. It's going to give all of your creature spells Offspring, which means for an additional 2 mana, whenever you cast them, you get a 1/1 copy of that creature. Now, the first thing I'll say outright is this deck is mana hungry, but there's a couple things we can do to counteract that, like adding things like Semblance Envil. This will reduce all the creatures in our deck by 2, making the Offspring cost free. Additionally, we have Rose Room Treasurer that generates treasure tokens whenever our creatures are being cast. We can use stuff like Altec Matter Weaver to create token copies of treasure tokens. Notably, I did find out if you get enough copies of Altec Matter Weaver, whenever we're casting our creatures and generating enough treasure tokens, you can kind of just cast all your creatures for free. Not okay, kind of funny at the same time. Additionally, we probably want to play a couple ways to bounce our creatures back to our hands, that way we can cast them again. again and get additional copies of them. And then this deck is going to play a lot of ping effects. That way, whenever we're casting our creatures and those creatures are entering the battlefield, we're dealing 1 damage to all of our opponents, kind of killing them with 1,000 cuts. Now, I will say there is a ton of different ways to build this commander. You can just go splashy, do some very, very expensive commanders, double up, or very expensive creatures, double up on those. You can go low to the ground, create a lot of creatures very fast, and they both have their weaknesses, right? Doubling up on very broken creatures wins you the game faster, but doing a lot of very little creatures all at once, you're kind of susceptible to board wipes. I went with the 1,000 cuts route, but everybody took their own take on this guy, and honestly, it's a pretty unique commander at the end of the day. At number 9, we have Arna. Now, this girl's really interesting. For 5 mana, you get a black, white, blue commander that has Ward 2, Flying, Lifelink, and then additionally, whenever a modified creature attacks, double the number of counters on it, and then for each non-token aura or equipment on it, go ahead and create another one of those as well and attach it to that creature. Now, what's really cool here is her interaction with the living weapons, because what's going to happen is that living weapon attacks, it makes a token copy of that living weapon. The living weapon tries to attach itself to the other living weapons, but you can kind of order the triggers to go ahead and just make another germ instead. So instead of just having a Batterskull on top of a Batterskull, you can have 2 different Batterskulls and 2 different germs. Pretty useful there, and honestly just a really funny interaction and a way to get a solid board state consistently without having to cast any creature spells. It also goes without saying she's really busted with aura cards that go ahead and have ETBs, like Nerd Rage. Nerd Rage enters the battlefield, draws us 2 additional cards, and then if we have 10 cards in our hand, it gives our commander +10/+10. This deck can commander damage people out consistently and a lot easier than people think. And then on top of that, it has a lot of other things going on for it as well. This deck can very easily go wide, and then when we include stuff like Nettle Cyst and all that glitters, these creatures are going to be massive. This commander is not to be trifled with, especially when we can include something like a Doomwake Giant, and it essentially ensures that we wipe the board very consistently every single turn as long as we have a meaningful board state and enough of those aura cards. Additionally, I just want to, go ahead and talk about her interaction with aura cards that make her bigger and give her 1/1 counters whenever she gains life because she has lifelink. What's going to happen is, let's say we have this one equipped to her. She attacks, she gets 4 +1/+1 counters, right? So now she's an 8/8. Now on attack, we're going to go ahead and double those 1/1 counters. So we're going to put an additional 4 counters on her. So now she's a 12/12. Then she deals combat damage. She gets an additional 12 counters put on her. And now she has enough power to one-shot somebody. Again, this happens incredibly fast and you have to discard a card to get rid of her. And then on top of that, we have access to blue so we can counter any interaction we want to as well. The card advantage is plentiful, and this girl just has a very unique ability that can do some very insane things when the deck pops off. At number 8, we have a super underrated commander in my opinion, and honestly, this is just one of those amazing commanders that is able to utilize cards that are just not good in any other deck and make them amazing. 3 Dog is a 3 CMC commander in Boros, so red, white, 1 generic, and then whenever we attack, so 3 Dog never actually has to attack, we just have to cast this guy, he can stay back, we'll attack with our creatures that we want to attack with, we get to sacrifice an aura card that is enchanting him, and then when we do, we're going to create a token copy of it for each attacking creature and put that aura card on our creatures. So it goes without saying, aura cards with ETBs are very powerful here. Like Atali's Favor, this just says explore 3 whenever this aura enters the battlefield. So if we attack with 5 creatures, sacrifice it, we are exploring 3 5 different times. And there's a plethora of other cards. We play auras here that generate creature tokens whenever they enter the battlefield. That way we're able to generate a board state very fast. We're playing our Archon effects. That way, whenever these aura cards are entering the battlefield, we're drawing additional cards. And honestly, there's a lot of aura cards in here that can deck us out if we're not careful, because some of them are going to draw us cards whenever auras enter the battlefield. Again, be very careful with these effects because they can kill you very easily in this deck. I just love this guy. I think he's underrated. He's pretty powerful when he pops off. And again, he's able to utilize cards that are useless in other decks. And whenever a commander does that, I just love it. Moving on to number 7, we have another one of my most favorite commanders of the year with Ygra. Now this is a 5 CMC commander in Gilgari, so it's a green, black, and then 3 generic. It has ward, sacrifice of food, which sounds pretty good until you realize he turns every single creature on the battlefield into food. So the ward's not as impactful as it seems because all they have to do is sacrifice a creature and then they can remove your commander, so watch out for that. But also, this guy's incredibly oppressive at the same time because there's a plethora of cards in Gilgari that just say, hey, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and then again, if you don't know, foods are artifacts. So we're playing stuff like Scion of Calamity that can axe 3 artifacts or enchantments at the same time, Silverback Gorilla that's going to get rid of an artifact whenever we cast a creature spell, we have Aberrant that just straight up gets rid of an artifact or enchantment whenever it attacks and deals combat damage. So it goes without saying, we are hating out our opponent's boards and getting rid of every single creature on the battlefield. Another very notable thing is this guy's going to get 2 +1/+1 counters whenever a food enters the graveyard. We're killing all of our opponent's creatures. All of our opponent's creatures are food, so this guy gets massive very quickly and allows us to use Power Matters cards to generate a ton of value. Additionally, we're playing some creature cards ourselves that want to end up in the graveyard, like Kakusho Evening Star to drain out our opponents. We're also playing Gruff Triplets. Gruff Triplets is incredibly good in this deck because you just keep reanimating it and sacrificing it, reanimating it and sacrificing it, and before too long, you have a massive board state of these Gruff Triplets that are additionally massive. So it just creates a playstyle that's very fun but kind of miserable for your opponents, and I am here for it. Our number 6 pick is going to be Aminatou Veil Piercer. Now this girl's incredibly unique. We're in Esper colors, so blue, white, and black, and then 1 generic, so 4 mana overall, and then she has a static ability at the beginning of our upkeep. She gets to Surveil too, so we're able to manipulate the top card of our library, which is going to be very impactful for her second ability. She's going to give all of our enchantment cards Miracle, and then their Miracle cost is going to be equal to their casting cost -4. So she's reducing the cost of all of our cards by a ton. Now, this is definitely one of those decks with a balance. You definitely want a lot of very impactful, high-costed enchantment cards, but additionally, you don't want to go full bore because you might end up with a dead hand of these massive enchantment cards that you can't cast. What I found the best way to build this girl is you want to include a high density of these high-costed enchantment cards that can additionally cheat cards into play. Like, let's look at Demons of Fate design. High-costed enchantment synergizes with the deck, but allows us to pay life to cheat some of these enchantments into play. Same with one with the multiverse. Once per turn, we're cheating a card into play for free. So now, even if those cards get stuck in our hand, we can cheat them onto the battlefield. Another piece to this deck is being able to take cards from our hand and put them on top of the battlefield. That way, we know exactly what we're getting whenever we draw a card and see it first time. Another notable thing about Miracle is it works on our opponent's turn and does get past the timing clause. So we're kind of gonna want to play some very meta cards like Heuristic Studies just because they're very efficient at drawing cards on our opponent's turn, and to get maximum value out of Aminatou, we're gonna have to be a little bit degenerate and play some of our Esper Sentinel effects that again are very efficient at drawing cards when it's our opponent's turn. Moving on to our top 5, we have Disa, and honestly, this girl's one of the most strongest reanimation decks we've gotten this entire year, along with having some pretty unique abilities. This is a 5 CMC Jund commander, so green, black, and red, my favorite colors, and then 2 generic, and then she has the ability whenever a Lurgoyf creature gets put into the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, you get to grab that Lurgoyf creature and throw it directly onto the battlefield, so we get free reanimation. What makes this girl really broken is you can just slam a Maskwood Nexus or Ashes of the Fallen in this deck, Conspiracy, any effect that turns all of your creatures into Lurgoyf creatures when they're in the graveyard, and then now we just cast a Buried Alive, get our combo pieces, and win the game because we just reanimated all of those creatures for free. Now, while that strategy is super powerful, I'm kind of more interested on focusing on her second ability. Whenever we deal combat damage to a player with 1 or more creatures, we get a Termagoyf creature token. Yeah, remember when this card was just straight up $500? Now it's a token, and I want as many of them as possible. So we need to include creatures that can consistently deal 1 damage to each of our opponents very consistently every single turn and every single combat step. So including stuff with Myriad like like the Master Multiplied is going to be perfect. Additionally, there's even Lurgoyf creatures with Myriad, so again, that's even more perfect. The last thing we want to include is extra combat steps, and why not include extra combat steps that can additionally hit each one of our opponents very consistently, like Bloodthirster here. Not only can he consistently hit every single opponent because, again, we're getting those extra combat steps, he's hitting the extra opponents. Now, whenever we're creating those extra Lurgoyf creatures, as long as we have Anger in the graveyard, they can hit our other opponents, and we just create a massive board state. Then we have the, Terror of the Peaks version of the Lurgoyf creatures. You can kind of just win the game from there. There's some wacky stuff you can do with this girl, and I'm here for it. Just remember to include the other cards that also want to hit our opponents every single turn very consistently, like your Professional Facebreakers, your Grim Hirelings, and the Assassin one. Still don't know the name. Then, just include some cards that disincentivize your opponents from blocking, like Orin Frostfang. Not only do you get card advantage, all your creatures have Death Touch, and they're really hard to block. Number 4 is going to be Rendmaw. This is a 5 CMC Gilgari commander, so again, black, green, 3 generic, and then whenever we cast a spell or play a spell, land card, with dual typings, we're going to gift everybody a tapped crow that is goated for the rest of the game. Now, this is very notable because the first thing you would think is like, okay, all of our opponents are just going to trade the crows back and forth, and it's not going to be very impactful, right? Wrong, because the fact that they're tapped and goated is extremely busted, right? Because what's going to happen, let's say we gift out 2 crows, right? The first player untaps his 2 crows, then they have to attack instantly, and since all of the other players' crows are tapped, they can't block with those crows, and then it's going to repeat, right? Now those crows are tapped, player 2's crows are untapped, but player's 3 crows are tapped as well. So at no point in the game are these crows going to be untapped and ready to block, which is crazy. The only thing is, I will say, kill the sacrifice player first, that way they can't sacrifice the crows for value, but beyond that, everybody's going to be hitting each other with these crows. And then we get to include cards like Coat of Arms. Kind of crazy here because of the amount of crows we are creating. Let's say everybody has 3 crows. That's 12 crows on the battlefield and 36 damage per player. Now, you might be worried about dying here, but as long as there's 3 people in the game, here's what's going to happen. Player 2 is going to kill player 3 or 4, and then the player 3 or 4 is going to kill the other player. That leaves you to kill the last player. So at no point are you ever in danger unless one of them lives. Then you might be in trouble because once it becomes a 1v1, you're going to have to get rid of all of those crows. That's why we're going to be playing stuff like Massacre Worm. Now we can just drain them to death with the remaining crows and win the game. Once it becomes a 1v1, we're definitely have the advantage because we're playing a lot of cards that benefit off of killing these crows, like Azuri's Predation. We even have stuff like Species Specialist, which honestly, kind of weird that it doesn't care about it being our creatures. This guy just cares about any crow dying, and we're drawing a card. So that's going to be incredibly broken for this strategy. Moving on to number 3, we have a weird little guy with Flubs. Now this guy is Teamer colors, so only 3 mana, red, blue, and green. He says you can play an additional land, and then whenever you play a land or cast a spell, you can draw a card. If you have no cards in hand. If you have cards in your hand, you're going to have to discard a card. So this guy is trying to get rid of your hand as fast as possible so you can get card advantage from him, but you can only ever have 1 card in your hand at a time. Kind of weird. This is where you're really going to want to utilize cards that allow you to play cards from the top card of your library, from your graveyard, and from exile. So including stuff like loot, you're going to want stuff that has some dredge ability to it. So Life from the Loam seems very important here to grab lands, put them into your hand, and then we can use 6 to retrace those lands, allowing us to cast spells from our graveyard. You're just going to have to get really creative with this deck and getting the utility he has. Another thing that really crossed my mind when looking at loot here, or sorry, not loot, Flubs, is he could be the perfect Possibility Storm deck. Now, this is not going to make you any friends by any means, but since we're not casting a ton of spells from our hand, it's not going to affect us a ton, and it's going to be really annoying for our opponents. So just something to think about here. I know this guy also has seen some CEDH play where players just try to use spells that are as low to the ground as possible and cost 0 mana, just trying to turbo cast their entire deck to win the game. Kind of a funny deck there as well. This guy just enables a lot of, fun brewing ideas, and additionally, he's just super unique. At number 2, we have Vihaan. This guy is hands down the most unique Aristocrats deck I have ever played. He's red, white, and a black, so only 3 mana, and then at the start of combat, he's going to animate all of your treasure tokens and turn them into 3/3 assassins with vigilance. Now, not only can we utilize tribal synergies here, using stuff like species specialists to draw cards whenever we sacrifice these treasure tokens, additionally, we're able to attack with these treasure tokens and then immediately sacrifice them afterwards to get aristocrat values from our blood artist effects as well. Then we're including stuff that just generates a ton of treasure tokens. Like whenever we play the Titanic and connect, generate 7 treasure tokens, not only is that 21 damage, additionally, that's 7 die triggers. Then we pair it with stuff like Pitiless Plunderer and Mahadi Emporium Masters, and this effectively is able to replace every single treasure token we sacrifice every single turn. So it kind of creates an engine where you're constantly getting creatures back and generating mana at the same time. The only problem with this deck is getting that engine online, but once you've generated treasure tokens, this deck is really hard to stop and the value train just keeps on going. Without further ado, the most unique commander from 2024 is Bello, Bard of the Brambles. Now, this guy is a 3 CMC creature in Gruul, so red, green, 1 generic, and he says on our turn, whenever an artifact or enchantment above 4 CMC enters the battlefield, it's going to enter as a 4/4 elemental with indestructible haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. That's a lot of words for us Gruul players, but he has some very unique interactions. Let's look at Molten Echoes, one of the best cards in the deck. When this enters the battlefield, it's going to be an elemental. Obviously, we're going to choose elementals, and then it actually sees itself enter the battlefield as an elemental, so you instantly get a token copy of this. This means for the rest of that turn, you're going to get 3 copies of anything you cast. Kind of crazy, especially when this deck runs a ton of mana rocks above 4 CMC. Now, why would we be doing that? One, it's just efficient here because we already get card advantage from our commander, and then we're just adding ramp that just works really well with the deck. Additionally, the overall strategy of this deck is to give these elementals vigilance, or at least a way to untap them after combat. That way we're able to attack with them and then utilize them after combat for their mana ability. That's going to allow us to go ahead and cast additional extra combat spells. Not okay, right? Because then we get to attack again and draw even more cards, giving us a chance to, you guessed it, draw even more extra combat spells. This deck is one of those non-deterministic storm decks that draws a ton of cards, deals a ton of damage, and just does some wacky things with this raccoon. I encourage you to check out the deck list. I have gotten some feedback saying, hey, this is awesome when it works, but honestly, my raccoon's just getting sniped. What I would suggest to the people in those play groups is add more protection, right? If your raccoon's getting sniped, add more protection. Another really busted thing you can do with this guy is actually give him indestructible and then play cards like Nivendrel's Disc. Nivendrel's Disc was made before they were like, hey, we should make them sacrifice these board wipe things, right? Yeah, we should. Well, Nivendrel's Disc doesn't have that text on it. It just says, hey, destroy artifacts, enchantments, and all creatures. And then it's just expecting you to destroy Niv's Disc in the process, right? Well, not when it has indestructible and it's an elemental. So we just cast Niv's Disc, we untap it with one of our mini untap effects, and then we go ahead and indefinitely wipe the board. Kind of messed up. Thank you guys for watching this long. This is probably my longest video on the channel, so if you made it this far, you're a trooper and I appreciate you. Additionally, guys, if you want to see the most powerful commanders from 2024, you can look at this video right here. With that being said, guys, let's shout out those patrons. Irrelevant, Chicken Salad, Creator, The Professional Heal. You guys rock. I hope this helped you guys in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you guys in the next one.